Thank you so much. It's really an honor, a privilege to be here. Also a challenge. The first talk after lunch is always a bit. And I'm going to talk about food lots. So this is, thanks to the organizer. Special thanks to Suzanne Urban for suggesting my name. I am going to talk about a specific site in the city of Venice, the Ghetto of Venice. And in the larger context of a city that is very famous as a World Heritage Site. I'm sure that many of you have been to Venice. What is less known, or at least is something that people don't want to hear a lot about, is that Venice is also a hotspot of the Anthropocene. It's one of the key places to observe the environmental crisis. And this is why we decided 3 years ago to launch the first Italian master's degree in environmental humanities, where the environmental crisis is addressed from an interdisciplinary and humanities point of view. And our inspiration comes from one of the most important world intellectuals, an Indian writer and anthropologist, Amitav Ghosh. And I know that there's a very important rule not to have too much text on any slide, but this is really a very, very important quote where Ghosh, as a secular Hindu writer, calls our attention to the importance of religious organizations for the unprecedented challenge of climate change. And so he says that, in a nutshell, political organization and nation states have a very short-term perspective and short-term interest, and so they are not well equipped to deal with the challenge ahead of us, whereas religious organizations transcend nation states, acknowledge intergenerational long-term responsibilities. They do not partake in economicistic ways. That's not true, but I think this is at least the aspiration. And they're capable of imagining non-linear change. And if religious groupings around the world can join hands with popular movements, they may well be able to provide the momentum that is needed for the world to move forward on drastically reducing emissions without sacrificing considerations of equity. So the question I'd like to address with you today is whether this argument made by Ghosh in terms of religious organizations can be applied to a religious site as such. And that site is the Ghetto of Venice. The Ghetto of Venice was created in 1516 to confine the Jews who until then were basically not even allowed to live in the city. It was a segregated area for almost 3 centuries until it was liberated by Napoleon in 1797, and then has remained a very important site with 5 early modern synagogues still standing, and has become one of the most popular tourist destinations in Venice. Which is interesting because until recently, until 30 years ago, it was no longer on the map. This is because Jewish heritage of Venice was not seen as part of the city heritage as a whole. Now, there is a very important additional factor, which is, as many of you will know, the word ghetto itself comes from there. That's where the word comes from, and this is how, in a very strange, interesting, fascinating, uncanny manner, the name of a specific peripheral square in northern Venice has become a global metaphor for segregation, but also cultural resistance. And these are recent publications that have really detailed this semantic journey. Yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. And why is this important? Because these are not two parallel stories. So the local stories of the Venice Jewish ghetto as a local site and the story of the ghetto as a global metaphor are not parallel, separated stories, but stories that are intertwined. And so one of the arguments is that the other ghettos, Jewish and non-Jewish ghettos, reflect back on the original site. The ghetto of Venice is a memory space that travels, as the title of a recent collection very eloquently argues. And the point that the other ghetto reflect back on the original is demonstrated by this image that was a photograph taken by a Bosnian photographer back in 2016 for CNN. And what you see here is real, it's all there, except that what it shows is a wall with a Holocaust memorial topped by barbed wire that creates a completely misleading connection to the Nazi ghettos of Europe, whereas this was an early modern ghetto, but was never a place where Jews were segregated during the war. It shows the indispensable, unavoidable presence of the police offering security for all Jewish sites in Italy. And then it shows what to outside eyes look like the most authentic and genuine Jewish presence, the presence of the missionary group of Chabad, the ultra-Orthodox Jews that make very efficient, outreach work and marketing activities by looking Jewish in a Jewish site, even though they arrived in Venice in 1988. So the problem of how the ghetto is perceived, largely because it is a square, there are two squares. All the beautiful heritage sites are inside, so they're not visible. This is the one great Venetian monument where all the beauty is kind of hidden from view. It was wonderful to see that earlier in that lovely presentation on the eventization of the facade of the San Marco Basilica was used as an example, and so that's the opposite of the ghetto, right? San Marco, the arresting facade, the ghetto. So that also helps making the ghetto a kind of screen where different visitors can project their own expectations and perceptions of ghettos, Jews of different provenances and non-Jews. Now I'm going to show you three recent pictures of the ghetto that shows some unique but, I would say, very relevant moments in the history of the place. This is the rehearsal, the ghetto as a space of performance, of an event, a unique event. This was the first ever performance of William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice in the ghetto in 2016, the year of the 500th anniversary. And we have to thank or be angry at William Shakespeare. This is, I'm angry at him on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and kind of because it has made Shylock the most famous Venetian Jew of all times, except that he never existed. So this also shows the power of fiction on a place. And that was a wonderful, magical moment to reflect on this legacy of fictions about the Jews on the place itself. And this is the ghetto flooded, acqua alta, the typical rising waters, in 2019, where Venice experienced the most severe flooding since 1966, and was a turning point in acknowledging that this is not just a picturesque phenomenon. This is sea level rise knocking at the doors of Venice and of all coastal cities. And last but not least, the uncanny moment, the mirror image of the ghetto as the festive stage of a theatrical performance. This was, I think, April 5th, 2020, the day where, with a special license, I could go there to buy matzo bread for Passover, because it was, the pandemic, the lockdown. And I think this is the only time in my life where I saw the ghetto completely deserted people on a sunny Sunday. So these are three very special, extreme moments. But what is the everyday reality? I bet that many of you have been there. And so the what happened in reality in the ghetto is that you have tourists and tourists and tourists and more tourists, which is of course both the blessing and the curse of the city and of the ghetto. So the larger question is, what do you do when tourism is your main fuel, and at the same time also what is really threatening your existence? There is still a sort of a historic Jewish community running its services, but it's a smaller and smaller community that suffers the fate of the entire community of Venetians. So being gradually squeezed out of the city because it become unaffordable to live there. And so more and more tourists. So if you go to a synagogue service on Shabbat, you will see 300 people, and roughly probably 95% are temporary visitors. But what I really want to focus on is what I call defense mechanisms in both the very physical, technological, and psychological sense. I think it is very important that when we talk about sustainability and the environmental crisis, this is the point that we make in our master's degree, is that people don't like to hear about these things. So the first defense mechanism was the creation of these humongous barriers called Mose, with a nod to Moses, that are currently protecting the city from the rising water. So if you go to Venice today, we no longer use, this is almost strange for me, we no longer use the Wellington boots that every family routinely uses in November, because every time there's aqua alta, even moderate ones, this goes up, sucks, I think, 300,000 euros every time it goes up, which is also part of the larger. So it creates this illusion that we can protect ourselves from climate change through technology. The technofix. And then you see, this is probably, the picture you see, it's a picture taken during Carnival, but I'm so happy to be here, among other things, because I'm not there. This is a long holidays in Italy, and Venice is going to look exactly like that. Over-tourism has become, after the lockdown, something you observe on a daily basis, especially when there is a holiday, and the pressure is becoming unsustainable. And then you have two tourists happily swimming in St. Mark's Place, thinking that aqua alta is just fun. And this is the type of defense mechanism that a great British psychoanalyst called Sally Weintraub has called disavowal. When we know rationally that the environmental crisis is with us, but we simply forget it and try to enjoy and go on with our lives as if that is not there. This is my, let's say, larger framing of the picture, because what I want to do in the second part of my talk is to show how, as part of a small but very active organization called Bet Venezia, a home for Jewish culture, we have engaged with these issues, try to see whether Jewish Venetian culture can be relevant in a kind of more global sense, but also how can specifically address the issue of the environmental crisis. And I'm going to give you examples of 3 different projects that have been carried out since 2013. The first one is about literature. It's about how the tangible heritage of the ghetto can be turned into intangible heritage of literature, then the visual arts, and then something else. That will be my last example. And this project was, I would say, facilitated by the fact that Bet Venezia owns nothing physically. We don't even have an office. We exist as a small organization. We had an office for 1 year in the ghetto. Now it's a wine bar. So every time I go there, I'm sad. Well, I mean, this is a joke, but it is true. If you go to Venice nowadays, you can drink yourself to death, but don't try to replace a button if you lose it on your jacket, because that's what you can eat and drink, and that's it. So what happened was that this man in the picture is Amitav Ghosh himself, the author of The Great Derangement, that was invited by Bet Venezia to be the first participant in a project called Reimagining the Ghetto for the 21st Century. And the idea was that, for complicated reasons, the great canon, literary canon, Thomas Mann, Marcel Proust, John Ruskin, you name them, all the great writers about Venice after the end of the Serenissima never engaged with the ghetto. The ghetto was edited out of the cultural memory of the city. So instead of just complaining about this thing, we said, all right, let's try to create a new canon. And so we started inviting writers of different nationalities, languages, religions, ethnicities to write about the ghetto, especially taking with them their own idea of the ghetto. And what was absolutely extraordinary is that Amitav Ghosh arrived, went out for grocery shopping, and realized that the guys selling the groceries in the neighborhood of the ghetto spoke the same type of Bengali language that he spoke with his grandmother. Because the largest migrant community in Venice is made of Bangladeshi people who have mostly escaped from flooded areas in their country. And that was the beginning of a novel called Gun Island, which is a kind of page-turner where he reconnects the history of Jewish migrants to the ghetto in the 16th century to the story of modern-day migrants from Bangladesh. So the religious refugees of 500 years ago meet and interact symbolically with the ecological refugees of today. And it was, I think, one of the great moments of Bet Venezia when I summoned up the courage of asking Amitav Ghosh, you were supposed to write an essay. When are you going to deliver the essay, please? We're running late. And he said, no essay, I've written a novel. And I just And this is important. Why? Because this is not, as we have done in many other places, an occasional piece. This is not something that was created for the occasion of a project, nicely written and staying in Venice or in that specific area. It became a way of making the ghetto travel. So that has become part of his literary production. It's not that people will buy this novel because it honors the ghetto. It buys the novel because they want to read a novel by Amitav Ghosh. Then everyone can decide whether they like it or not, but that's what the ghetto did. And so here we see him. And this picture also represents the basic concept behind this type of project. So keeping the artist in Venice, giving them time, giving them space, making them interact, absorb the atmosphere, the history of the heritage site. And I think it is also important that this is not a Jewish intellectual. This is a writer that we had approached because he had written very eloquently about Jewish history in a previous book. But the way in which he reconnected the topic of Venice as a cosmopolitan city with the topic of Venice as the forefront of the battle against the consequences of climate change was really amazing. The second project is about visual arts, using the visual arts. In our experience working with the environmental humanities, there is a problem that a lot of art that addresses climate change is overly didactic. You just want to sort of put out a message and it's illustrative but doesn't have a lot of artistic merit. It doesn't trouble you, it doesn't stop you, it doesn't make you think. And so what we did was to invite a group of artists for a project called Living Underwater to study in Venice. Live, learn, and create in Jewish Venice is the motto of Bet Venezia. And the idea was that they would study with local and international scholars working on specifically on the ecological knowledge and the ecological themes in Jewish culture, and then would create something. And what they created is a zine that they were mostly print artists that made wonderful etchings, but they also made sculptures. So that big thing is the cover of a zine, a large format magazine that exists both in paper and in a digital version that you can download from livingunderwater.org. Keynote.org or for Bet Venezia site. And we were so happy that that series of artworks became an exhibition that was first premiered at the Jerusalem Art Biennale and then at the Krakow Festival last year. And I think it's also interesting that this work has never been exhibited in Venice. So it is a response to Jewish Venice that has been in display in Poland, in Israel, but this is not something we complain about. This is actually something that shows how the interaction between the artist and the heritage site can make these ideas travel and inspire. The snow globes were amazing. So the lead artist came with all the material to make snow globes, and then every artist created a specific snow globes addressing the idea of climate change. That also originated a lovely little book called Living Underwater, Jewish Views on the Environmental Crisis. It's a small format that exists in English, Polish, and now Italian edition that has very short text with just the basics of what Jewish culture offers and says about climate change, with secular contribution, religious contributions, international contribution, experiential contribution, and a kind of dialectical relationship with the images. And again, none of these images you would see and say, oh, this is about climate change. The idea is that the artistic response doesn't have to be so straightforward. It's more about the relationship. And the last project is an ongoing project. So, literature, visual arts. I should mention that even the large zine has a lot of essays that that illustrate what are the main themes. The last project ongoing is called Cooking the Future, and that's a look into the tradition of Italian Jewish cuisine that, as most things about Italian Jewish things, is not really Italian Jewish. It's an incredible combination of different things from different places. And here you see a conversation between Andy Arnovitz, who has been the lead artist also on the previous project, the Living Underwater, with Marco Bravetti, who is a local chef, not Jewish, never engaged before with Jewish cuisine, who is a master of speculative gastronomy. I met him because he reinvents tradition, thinking of a more sustainable future. So the idea is that he was totally intrigued with the idea that the laws of kashrut, of keeping kosher, are a kind of blueprint for all the limitations that we have to learn to live with when a lot of ingredients will not be easily available. And so the way the project went was that we interacted with local Jewish families sharing their recipes at home and taken from the most famous Italian Jewish cookbook. And so you see here Andy, the artist, Laura and Alisa, two women from Venice, and Miriam Camerini, who is going to be the first Orthodox rabbi, first woman to be ordained an Orthodox rabbi in Italy. And she's also an expert on kashrut and a singer. So the idea was that we would take these recipes, the recipes would be made, they would be observed, and then they would be reinvented by Marco so basically looking at the future of Venice through the fridge. So, you open the fridge and you see what the future has. That's the one thing. And I'll give you in conclusion two examples of what he's been doing, and that will also become a cookbook. And again, something that we hope will travel. One of the best known Venetian recipes, Venetian recipes, is called sarde in saor, which is sardines marinated in onion with raisins and pine nuts. So the presence of raisins and pine nuts has suggested to some that there is a Jewish contribution there. But with most recipes, we don't really know the origin of that. So what Marco did was what he called fugitive sardines. So he made the sardines recipe without the sardines, calling attention to the fact that sooner or later those sardines may be completely extinct, or also trying to alert us to a more sustainable consumption of sardines so that we can think about possible futures. And so we had a wonderful Shabbat dinner that we cannot visualize because we didn't take pictures on Shabbat. But he made the onions, the raisins, the pine nuts, but the sardines had run away. And my last picture is what I consider so far his most interesting achievement. There is a specific dish with a mysterious, enigmatic name called Friesensal. That sounds somewhat Germanic, but no one really has a good etymology of it, which is a type of pasta that is eaten by Jewish families on a specific Shabbat, and that's a Shabbat where you talk about the parting of the Red Sea. And so this noodle pasta, this noodle dish, reenacts that horrible moment. So it's noodles with, again, raisins and pine nuts and meatballs. The meatballs, so the noodles are the Red Sea. The meatballs symbolizes the wheels of the chariot of the Pharaoh's soldiers that drown. So it's almost a kind of act of cannibalism that you think of it. But and you see what Andy did. So Andy put the portion of the Torah there, and then put the Egyptian soldiers carrying the dish. So what? And again, when I planned that, I didn't know I was going to talk immediately after lunch. What Marco did was he decided to reflect and substitute. I think I'm no longer amplified. I don't know if something happened with... Anyway, you can hear me, I hope. I hope there's no... Okay, I'm basically done. Yeah, okay, thank you. So what Marco did was to get rid of the meatballs, turn the meatballs into balls made with a certain type of very poor fish that lives in the muddy parts of the lagoon, and to use a lot of algae. So powdered algae in the noodles that became green, and also algae that were used to dress the pasta. So in his words, instead of immersing ourselves in the Red Sea, we immerse ourselves in the lagoon and use a specific type of Jewish, Italian, Jewish, Venetian dish to reflect on the present, on how we manage to think about the past through tradition even while eating, and then also about possible future. So my simple conclusions are that artists are indispensable mediators, translators. For me, it's a very problematic thing that in our master's degree of environmental humanities, we have a course on Christianity and ecology, and students are not interested in taking it because they think that religion is not relevant in spite of what Amitav Ghosh and many of us think. So they can also be mediators between realms and fields that are not typically seen as mutually relevant. And that also means, and that's my other conclusion, is that requires time, space, and money for the artist to be in residence connected to the religious sites. So what we are seeing in Venice is this emergency of sea level rise, that oblivion, that disavowal of that phenomenon by an escalating extractivist type of tourism, and these forms of cultural resistance, I would call them, that use religious sites to think about larger environmental challenges, because the history of the ghetto is a great history of adaptation, and that's what we need. And so I hope that you can visit us, but if you cannot visit us, it's great that we have some of these books and zines and cookbooks coming your way before too long. Thank you.
I'm sure that many of us, of our members, recognize these beautiful pictures from Venice because we were there with our organization in 2016. And also thank you for inspiring us for thinking out of the box quite a different way. And I was so happy to see you in Krakow and achieve this wonderful booklet, because it's really wonderful about underwater. So thank you so much. Questions will be asked later. No. Now? Okay. Okay. Okay, so any questions from the room for the keynote speaker? Raise your hand. Are you all flabbergasted? About the algae, which is
thinking about the meatballs.
about the meatballs.
And the noodles.
Is there any new idea already bubbling up in your mind about using religion and the religions of the past and of the present to use for this future refrigerator, open refrigerator? No one?
Oh, okay. So it's the first time I have 3 microphones for any.
One is working.
I feel like Madonna. Okay.
That was a good one.
Okay.
No,
Oh, that's fine.
no, I'm very much surprised and also pleased by the fact that you connect this problem of environment with artists. I think it was just already said before that I think the connection between heritage and art is a normal connection, and in most of the cases we separate it. And I think it's very inspiring that you make this connection again. And I wonder how we can learn from it for other projects maybe. And, maybe you could give us some tips.
Well, thank you very much. I'll just go back, if I may quickly go to my very first slide. Is this then going to be put online permanently?
Yes.
Okay, so I cannot.
That's fine with you, yes.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, I was going to say something about a colleague of mine, but you know,
okay,
my,
okay, well,
no, that's fine. It's fine. It's not. That's not. It's not so, because my own response. So this is an eco-critical guide that we produced in Venice, Venice and the Anthropocene, and has a short chapter on the ghetto where I try to address that issue. But next to it is the flyer that we use to advertise our program. And when we showed that photoshopped pictures, some colleagues in our program we have scientists, so environmental scientists, we have sociologists, anthropologists, we have a very strong component of Scandinavian studies. Venice, Foscari is #1 in Italy in Swedish studies, so we have a lot of contribution with that. And when we showed that, one of the scientists said, this picture is misleading. There are no whales in the Grand Canal. We should put some sea bass there because that's an autochthonous species. And I use that extreme funny example to say that some well-meaning scientists think that you just throw the data at the people, the graphs, all the horrible numbers about ecological refugees, sea level rise, and that will simply move people to act. And that's quite the opposite. So, and some artists have what I call the skinny polar bear syndrome, where you want to visualize climate change and you depict typically a polar bear, and that's not good art. It can be, and it's not even about just communicating what the scientists do, which is something else. So the basic recipe is, if you're connected to any religious site, think of your favorite artist, think of your favorite writer, and invite them to be there, to feel the place. A lot of these people, I know that, of course, when you're from Venice, you have a certain advantage. So I acknowledge that. But we give them no money. So that's also, so it shows that a lot of these people tour the world and go from festival to festival, and then they're looking for meaning, and they're looking for ways in which they can make their art more relevant. And so you invite them, and of course I've given you the success stories. I could give you, the less successful stories. So it's if we have to try. But for sure, the visions of the ghetto that we have received from these artists, many of whom had no previous experience of the place, many of whom had never had connection with Jewish culture in general, are amazing. And they reactivate the interest for the past, which is the other thing that is so important. That through their present engagement, then they make people go back to the history and the place. So in the cookbook, we're putting both the traditional recipe and the algae, so that one can choose.
So, and now people might consider they start swimming with dolphins in Venice. At least it inspires you for another way of thinking, yeah? Because this is what in the Netherlands they call it omdenken. I don't know if there's anybody else raises their hand for a question. That's it. Okay.
By the way, the program is entirely in English, a little bit if I can, I'm the merchant of Venice selling my merchandise, so in case you want to.
Sorry, I don't have a question. I thought your lectures are inspiring. Maybe to add to your opinion, I think indeed it's very important to have artists reflecting on cultural heritage. And as Chronicle Churches, we do that as well. We had a project earlier this spring, last year, and we asked artists to reflect on our history of slavery. And they came up, 4 artists we invited to reflect on that, and one of the artists came up with a huge tapestry in which you could see the history of slavery of Groningen, which is quite unknown. So I totally agree with, and also, for example, we have a project called Monnikenwerk, Monk's Work, where artists work in the churches and reflect on the spaces and what it brings to them. So I totally agree that artists give a different perspective on how to look at cultural heritage, but also how to look at your own past and create a way for the future. And I think it's very important also to keep our heritage alive. So I think that's, thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. I think the 2 operations, I think the most important one, decolonizing the cultural imaginary and heritage, and ecologizing the heritage.
So this certainly speaks for creativity and culture, or culture and creativity, as a way forward, and also as a way of raising awareness and bringing to the public.
Can I also just reiterate the fact that some of the participants to this project were Jewish artists that had a lot of knowledge about their tradition and not necessarily about Italy, but other, including the chef, were people that engaged with Jewish culture for the first time. So there is also a strong, I would say, cross-cultural interfaith dimension to the project, which I think is also important.
And what is so strong about it is that you, especially also with the underwater and with the exhibition that was traveling, that it was not in Venice, but it was outside Venice. So you bring it to another place to raise awareness and so on. So that's also a new way, not only thinking on in situ in your own place, but also bringing people in by going out, which it's also a very interesting perspective. I think if there are no other questions or no other additions, then we move to the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So we are going to present some examples on the relationship between rural cultural heritage, landscape. So the idea is to just put together landscape, heritage, and sustainability. So just very brief, because we want to focus on the examples, but the idea of cultural landscape, this morning the World Heritage Convention was mentioned. So in the revision of this World Heritage Convention of the UNESCO in 1992, appeared for the first time this idea of cultural landscape, that is the idea of combining works of nature and humanity. So the idea is that we have this interaction between people and nature. So, and this is for us, one of the points. The idea here is that the landscape combines the interaction of natural and human actions. And this relationship is very important because in this, people has lived in the landscape in different regions. And they have developed connections between nature. And especially this morning when we had this experience with the Sami music, and they were mentioning that spirituality was about nature and about this connection with nature. And in fact, landscape is part of this nature. So how we relate with nature is important. And based on this, we can find that we built our buildings. We obtained the food, before you were mentioning about food, from the landscape. So it's really conditioning how we live and also know how we relate with this. So this was mainly the idea. So something that has been mentioned several times is the question of values. So, and we have discussed about values. The idea is that landscape has different values, not only ecological values, but cultural values, educational values, and so on. And sometimes these values are very, they are different depending on the approach and depending on people. And for example, in the case of UNESCO, they claim for this outstanding universal value, but sometimes this value crashes with local values because they have different approaches. So the way how we understand these values is very important. And sometimes, for example, there are these kind of spiritual values. This morning, there was this spiritual dimension or existential dimension that is also present in landscape. And many landscapes have these spiritual values as well. But how we assess them, how we protect them, how we transmit them, not only focusing on ecological sustainability, but in general terms. So what are the narrative about this place is about? Because if we explain this connection between people and nature and between people and landscape, maybe we can be more aware of the importance of preserving also this environment. So the idea was to just look for some examples where these connections are strong.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
What would you do?
This one. Oops. Yeah.
Come on. Just in the 2021 conference, consideration was given to 4 aspects of sustainable religious heritage and where it merges with secular society. From looking at whether religious heritage is strictly religious or has a wider perspective. Then, community ownership and bringing different parts of rural communities together in management and preservation was the next idea. Two other aspects were artistic and whether artifacts should be in museums or in situ in original buildings, and then safeguarding and preservation, particularly in rural areas, engaging local people in ownership and enabling people, particularly young people, to use the correct heritage skills for preservation. Today, we are looking at these buildings and seeing in the era of climate change, these buildings have much to offer. Retaining buildings that have been in the landscape for centuries, many of which are in good condition despite natural disasters, warfare, etc., shows how important they are in the rural cultural landscape. There is also a growing movement against demolition of old buildings, which contribute to climate change. Some examples. I looked at 2 examples in particular, and this one really caught my eye. Some of you probably know it already or may even have been part of it. Ruritage. It's an extremely interesting project which I came across as I'm always looking for examples of sustainable development. This was a horizon project across several projects, east and west, looking at sustainable development, looking across the world. Rural communities tell us the story of thousands of years of long collaboration between nature and human society. In a time of constant new challenges, rural communities must grapple matters beyond protection, but grasp the opportunities and understand the potential, springing from their diverse and dynamic heritage. Ruritage turns rural areas into laboratories to demonstrate cultural and natural heritage as an engine of regeneration. Although finished, it is a very valuable and continuing project, and I know certain aspects of it are going on already. The other one must be familiar to some of us in FRH, Ambulance for Monuments, because it has been one of the award winners. I just think the title, Ambulance for Monuments, is absolutely superb, because it tells us so much of what people need to do. So this is a project that rescues buildings, and it rescues buildings with all kinds of people. And whether it uses an ambulance or not, I'm not absolutely sure, but I just think it is an absolutely brilliant idea. And this takes place in Romania. I'm so sorry, I forgot to say. So Silvia is going to tell you about a monastery.
Yeah, I bring you some other examples of places in Spain. So this one is the monastery of Poblet in Catalonia, and we found this example interesting because it's a Cistercian monastery, still with monks, that in 2010 began an ecological conversion process. So this means that they were working, well, they are still working based on 3 axes to improve the management of all facilities and properties of the monastery, especially thinking about how to be more ecological. So just trying to avoid the use of fuel, for example, and use renewable energies, trying to reduce the use of water. So this has been very, very important, but also to inform and educate the visitors about the importance of being more sustainable through the narrative, as we were saying. And also, and in terms of ecological sustainability, I think that this is important as well, to protect the quality of the rural and the forest landscape. So the monk community here was one of the promoters of protected natural area, not only in the monastery, but surrounding the monastery. So at the beginning, local community was against this, because they were just thinking that if they protect the area, they would not be able to use it as they were. But now they thank the monks because of this, because it has avoided excessive urbanization in the area. So they are very thankful to this. So it's an example of how a small action led by, in this case, the monk community, has also an impact on all the environment in different terms. Another example, we have the, sorry. Yeah. Another example is in another area of Spain. This is an area in Spain we use the term La España vaciada, so it's the empty Spain. So it includes all those rural areas that are losing population. So this morning, some colleagues were saying that even more difficult than get money sometimes is to get young people or to get people involved in the projects. And in this case, it's also more or less the same. So yeah, they are losing population. So it's not only about protecting heritage, but about trying to generate this sustainable development using heritage as a way of bringing people back to the place through these innovative projects that also include landscape and also include all these issues related to sustainability. And the last example is another example also from these rural areas in Spain. The name is the Holy Grail Trail, and the idea is that using this narrative of the Holy Grail, they are trying to create a route that goes, as you can see here, from a monastery in the Pyrenees down to Valencia. The idea, because before you were mentioning that in Venice there is a problem with tourists, but here they need tourists because it's a way of having some income. So they are trying to promote this, but based on the idea of, let's say, more sustainable tourism, because they promote walking in the small villages using local services, local food, so we don't have big hotels in these areas, so small accommodation. And we are talking about very, very small rates of people. So we might have like 10, 15 tourists per month doing this trail, so not much. But it's a way of trying to promote this. So it's another example. And we arrived to the end. So our conclusions, they are not really conclusions, but questions that we would like to share with you, and especially for the Q&A session. So maybe if you want to. Anyway.
Do we look at rural buildings in an ecological way at all? Do we look at who built them, what crafts were used, and also what materials were in use? Can religious heritage embrace all the sustainability dimensions? How can we develop holistic projects around religious heritage in rural areas? Can religious heritage be a tool for helping rural areas in their way to sustainable development? And can rural communities lead the way in changing thinking? Thank you.
I am standing today in front of you because we received an invitation from FRH in order to speak about the results and the activities of this project that we implemented a few years ago by a cross-border cooperation project between Romania and Ukraine. I want to say a few words about me. I am a PhD candidate at Stefan University of Suceava, and the research team is about the legacy of the royal house in the Carpathian Mountains, and I am also a local tourist guide. So you can see the title of the project that I also worked on, Historical and Ethnographic Heritage, part of the sustainable development of tourism in Bukovina heritage. You can see, maybe some of you know some things about Bukovina. It's a historical region known from the late 18th century. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and these days it's splitted and shared between Romania and Ukraine. And since the accession of Romania to the EU, lots of projects were implemented, and we started to understand each other at another level. So this project was started in 2009 when the grant contract was signed. The lead partner was from Chernivtsi, the university in Ukraine. It's interesting about the multiculturality of this town. The Ukrainians call it Chernivtsi, we Romanians call it Chernauts, and Austrians, Germans call it Chernovitz. I encourage you to visit if you have the opportunity. Here you can see the main results. Mainly the first and the last were the most important. Creating a register of the objects included in historical and ethnographic heritage, and additional investments in order to formation and promotion new tourist routes. These were the target groups from Romania and Ukraine. As you can see, we should have implemented the project initially between this period, but as you recall, the conflict in eastern Ukraine escalated exactly that time in 2014. And our Ukrainian, beside the physical effects on the site on eastern Ukraine, the not visible effects were spreading across whole Ukraine. Thus, our Ukrainian partner lost the money because their bank was closed. So we, as the partner in Romania, took all the efforts in order to achieve our objectives. That meant that we had to deal with this project until December 18th, 2015, And this is a picture taken in Czernowóz at the university with the occasion of the final press conference in the project. Speaking about religious heritage, I must tell you that this building where this conference took place is also very relevant for religious heritage. One main result, you can see this is a print screen from the interactive menu of a multimedia DVD. Yeah, our teams from Suceava and Czernowóz consisted in experts in history and geography, collected it was lots of field work, few hundred hours, lots of data, and after that it was processed. And on the multimedia DVD you can choose the options and see the information. This is the map. I also have a few pieces with me, printed, because as I said, the top result was this new routes that was designed by the teams. Here you can see routes in Czernowóz city related to religious heritage, and on this part there are routes in Suceava city in Romania. This is Suceava, this is Czernowóz, and here is a print screen of the data that is available on the internet. Sadly, the legend is only in Ukrainian because the website is maintained by the Ukrainian counterpart, and as I said, they have shortages in financing. But as I said, we also have the printed version, large scale. You can see here is the actual border between the two countries. It's the border of EU, NATO. And from the theme, from an ecological sustainability theme, we have from these routes that were designed, these ones are relevant because are for cycle tourism or trekking routes. Sadly, because Romania is trying to enter the Schengen area, although we had 4 crossing points, cross-border crossing points between Romania and Ukraine. So one is here, 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 and here. Only one of them was functional until last year. Another one, because it's a lot of pressure, logistic pressure, from Ukraine in order to export their goods. Another point was reopened, but still those that are more relevant in the mountainous area are still closed. Okay, thank you for your attention.
So we can also start by saying, hey. Hey. Wien. Yes. It's an honor to be here, and it's great for us to be able to present our project, which is called BURB. And BURB is a short for Children's and Young People's Right to the Burial Ground. And it's a project that is financed by Allmänna Arvsfonden. And the project wants to awaken children's interest and educate them in multifaceted worlds of cemeteries. One of the main questions in our project is, how does the youth of today want cemeteries to look like now and in the future? My name is Kristina, and this is Helene, and we are the project managers. And with us today, we have 3 of our 5 representatives of our Child and Youth Council. It's Saga Skutsjö, Wilhelm Hegeton, Tua Ekman. And together yesterday we arranged this Run for Heritage, which took place yesterday. And we We gathered 4-year-old kids in the cemetery, and they had cemetery bingo. And then we, at the Norra Kyrkogården, and then we met some students from the gymnasium school, Spiken, and they did a bike orientation between different cemeteries here in Lund. Yes. So Sweden is one of the world's most secular countries, as well as one of the world's most multi-religious. And here, secularity is a prerequisite for multi-religiousness. This is reflected in the cemeteries of Sweden, where graves of different religions are sometimes placed next to each other, and sometimes religions have designated plot areas. This diversity is useful in our project.
And as the project title indicates, the cemetery is used for a place for learning, creating curiosity, and also understanding. In turn, knowledge and understanding provide opportunities for co-determination and influence. At the same time, tolerance is created for different cultures and religions. On the whole, a sense of being comfortable with a place, funeral, and death is possible. An advantage of cemeteries is that they are everywhere, both in cities and in the countryside. They concern us all, regardless of age. In Sweden, cemeteries established before 1950 are classified as cultural heritage sites, whether religious or secular. Not only the tombstones with their inscriptions and symbols, but also the green cultural heritage in the form of avenues, mourning trees, hedges, etc. are protected. I think we're lost in... No, right. This makes the cemetery a living place and a green haven. Here you can watch the seasons come and go as a symbol of life, death and eternity. The cemetery is also a green park environment with room for reflection and perhaps prayer.
So how it's done? Well, in what we call a funeral lab, we meet children at the cemetery where they learn about the place based on various themes that can be connected to the curriculum. This project has a child and youth council, as I said before, which is in the process of being established, that will ensure children's opportunity to have a say. So 5 young people under the age of 26 have been employed. 3 of them are here. Yes?
Yeah, and we study urban planning or landscape architecture. In terms of this project, we work, for example, with social media and developing the child and youth council.
Yes. So, in conclusion, the cemetery, we use the cemetery as an arena for learning, influence, co-determination, curiosity, tolerance, democracy, death and grief, cultural heritage. And it's with and for children and young people. So, understanding cemeteries becomes a way to preserve the cultural heritage. Yes. Thanks so much for having us, and thank you for listening.
This research project develops a new conceptual model for a sustainable Orthodox monastic settlement on the Ardross estate in the Scottish Highlands. The work has been undertaken for the Archdiocese of Thyatira and Great Britain and has been developed within Newcastle University's School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape and is part of a linked research project titled Mobile Sanctuaries, Ritual Ecologies and Transnational Religious Communities of the Highlands. The main aim was to develop a conceptual model for a new contemporary 21st century sustainable monastic community and in so doing understand the implications and ways in which sustainable practices, including land cultivation, ecological preservation, resource self-sufficiency, cultural and economic activities, can be integrated within the local community and bioregional resource capacity. To understand this, we investigated the links between monastic life and sustainable theory, understanding how spiritual religious beliefs intersect with the three pillars of sustainability and ecological preservation. This was used to create a theoretical framework for the further analysis and development of the proposal. We were particularly interested in understanding the symbiotic relationships and conditions between ritual human practices and non-human ecologies, and how these intersect in ways that can foster restorative and sustainable settlement practices as models for future net zero carbon and regenerative human settlements. The research was undertaken in broadly three distinct phases. The first of these explored the link between sustainability, ecology and monasticism using literature review and case study analysis. This analysis was used to interrogate the link between monastic settlements and sustainable trends, looking to understand how spiritual religious beliefs link to or drive activities related to sustainability and ecological preservation. The second phase investigated in more depth the UK context of Christian monastic communities using ethnographic analysis undertaken via questionnaires, interviews and site visits. The main objective was to investigate the historical and current context of Christianity in the UK, then focusing in on specific Christian Orthodox communities, exploring their links to local places. Using these case studies, we were able to better understand the relationship between monasteries, the context and local societies, and explore in detail the way in which Orthodox traditions are integrated with local characteristics, values and sustainability. St Anthony and St Cuthbert's Monastery in Shrewsbury proved to be particularly important in understanding these processes and the practical implementation of the monastic community from the bottom up. The third phase involved the synthesis of the above findings, leading to a refinement of a sustainable framework, which was then used in the testing of strategy and development of a new conceptual model for a monastic community on the Ardross estate. The main objective was to develop a preliminary proposal outlining strategies and feasible ways of developing a new monastic community, including procurement routes, profiles for users that fit the setting, phasing of the scheme through landscape intervention, design and technical strategies, as well as the means by which integration of the community in the local economic and societal context could be facilitated. The proposal establishes an early stage brief and a response that involves a gradual process of synthesizing people and landscape into a developing community that will anchor itself within the Celtic monastic tradition and Orthodox Christian liturgical particularities and accommodate them in a self-sustained ecosystem. The site choice was narrowed down from an analysis of 4 alternative sites proposed by the estate and has been informed by a wide-ranging high-level analysis using data including topographic, weather, soil, energy forecasting, habitat and ecological analysis, environmental and visual impact assessment, and using architectural and programmatic forecasting. A principal assumption made included an occupancy for up to 30 people at maximum capacity, but with phased implementation over time. There are a number of principal aspects to the proposal. It should be self-sustaining economically and in resource use in terms of energy, water, waste and food. Key benchmark targets defined were net zero life cycle and net zero life cycle plug load. Locally available energy generation was a principal factor in the site selection. Exchange of goods, produce and skills will help integrate the community with the local community of Ardross. A phased expansion over time will be essential to both the practical and social integration of the Orthodox and local communities. The strategy proposes starting with a small-scale domestic architecture with all the programmatic functions for a community of 3 to 4 individuals, including cells, refectory, library and chapel, and these will be contained in a single building. As the community grows, the hybrid functions of the original building are removed and relocated over the site, such as the refectory and cells, with the original shell then adapted into a single space containing a larger church and chapel. Other key aspects of the proposal include fostering approaches and behaviours that reduce resource consumption, reduce waste and encourage recycling of materials and goods. The proposal also contains strategies for sustainable infrastructures needed to support the community, including water, food, heat, power and bathing. The ecological strategy for the site and monastic activities related to it focus on sustainable crop production in ecologically mindful ways without the use of chemicals, fertilisers and pesticides, and that focus on soil health and the creation of habitats and biodiversity, thereby integrating agriculture and animal farming with the creation of wildlife habitats that benefit both the farmer, crops and ecosystem. The strategy also encourages the use and experimentation with low-tech, low-embodied energy construction materials, using as far as possible locally available materials and local craft skills. The project is currently at a pre-planning stage of development. It has thus far established a theoretical framework linking monastic and theological practices with contemporary sustainability thinking. It has also established a vision for the site and a model for integrating the key development criteria that can be used as the basis for the further development and refinement of the design concepts. Thank you.
Thank you for these very interesting presentations. I have a brief comment about the Holy Grail Trail, and then I have a question for Bogdan. I think that the Holy Grail Trail is fantastic, and I just want to say the experience in the part of Umbria where I have a house, central Italy. They recently, just before COVID, started something called the Cammino dei Borghi Silenti, the trail or path, a pilgrimage trail of silent villages, which is a similar thing to take people around on a 90-kilometer walk, which has done exactly the same thing for this very neglected part of the town, where part of the country where it has established and helped with the local economy and brought hundreds of people. So it's great. And for Bogdan, I know that in the same time period, there was a trans-border between Hliboka area and Siret area, Hliboka and Ukraine and Siret area in Romania, a trans-border EU-sponsored touristic, cultural heritage, religious heritage project. And they put signage around cultural heritage sites. Do you know, I mean, also with the project that you mentioned, are these still ongoing, or what happened after they were closed? Are it's 10 years ago that these signage was put up. Has anything been done to maintain all of this stuff or keep it going, or is it just over and then forgotten, or is it promoted and used? Yours and that other project.
Yes, thank you for the question. As I said, in Ukraine, they have a huge shortage in gathering financing. They have a lot of other kind of problems right now. But still in Romania, we have the same problem in order to get financing from our government. Speaking about this border area, I know about this other project. It was the county council was involved in Romania, and the physical results that can be seen outside. From my recalling, in Siret, there is a history museum, and I know for sure that right now it's being reconstructed. But besides this, as I said, very, very low financing is coming from the government.
Is the tourism still promoted?
Yes, of course. We have, we at the Stefan University of Suceava, we are still ongoing. We have students. We have field trips. The airport is developing, but quite right now it is not because of due to tourism, but because of the incoming of the refugees. Maybe when the conflict will slow down, we can talk on another basis.
That's another way of suffering from conflict. So we saw this morning how Ukraine is hit, but it also hits Romania as it is on the direct border. Multiple different ways.
If I can say, last week I went within a current project that is in the implementation period, and the committee that is monitoring this project, also on other projects that the university is involved, agreed to change the budget and to buy kits for survival during wartime. And I went to Ukraine, in western Ukraine, and I also encountered during the Romanian side, until the border, a protest of Romanian farmers. So it's a very complex situation.
Thank you. Next question here.
I will go up first. We have time enough.
Yeah, this is a question for Helene and Kristina. First of all, if you could just say a little bit more about the educational activities related to the centre, if you could just expand on that. And I've got a specific question, which is, do explain how cemetery bingo works. And I'm also fascinated what the prize was, if you want.
Yeah, the bingo. Yes. Oh, the bingo. You mean? So the first question was the funeral labs, what we call the funeral lab, how it's interacted with the school.
Yeah, if you could say something about what were the educational projects, what was the nature of the educational work that you did? What was it?
So we're all the different areas in school, like religion, history, nature, everything. We try to connect it with the cemetery as a place for learning. So we can take the kids to the cemetery and we can talk about religion, or we can talk about history, we can talk about biology, we can look at the trees, and we talk about the green cultural heritage. So we can talk about the tree as a ecosystem. So that's how we work with the children on the cemetery list.
So what about like with history? So did you, for example, look at some of the individual headstones and tell the story of the people who were buried there?
Yes, we can do that. So we can do with the different people who are buried there, and we can talk about the green cultural heritage. I mean, a tree is planted and it will take a lot of years for it to grow. And we can talk about, well, how was it like 100 years ago? How did it look around here? How was it in this town about that time, you know?
And the bingo.
And the bingo. So we had our youth in our children youth council. They did the bingo trays, like different images like you can find on the cemetery, like tombstones, trees. You can find also like birds, squirrels, and you can find trees, and you can find also like when you try to maintain the grave, you have different tools, and so they had to find the tools too.
How old were the kids?
4 to 5 years old.
4 to 5 years old.
And they had this bingo plate, and they made a crossover every image that they found. And also we saw that they were walking around, and they could go into a grave, and they saw this tombstone, and they were like, "Can you walk on that?" No, you can't walk on it, but you can pat it and you can feel it. And well, what does it say? Well, it says like this. And do you know what that is? It's an occupation that it doesn't exist anymore. It was 100 years ago. That was another occupation, and then we could talk about that. So yeah. Yes.
The first prize. Was there any prize given?
Yes, fruits and drinks.
Fruits and drinks, yeah.
There was
Not
no
wine.
Fruits and a little drink.
Okay.
Yes.
There is a question.
Overnight stay.
Okay, you start.
On the cemetery.
Yeah.
Welcome to stay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I also have a comment on that project. I think it's a really nice project, and we, the Great Church of Breda in the Netherlands, where I work as a curator, we're doing something similar with memorial stones, and I want to share it because it kind of connects back to an earlier topic we talked about, involving youth and having money to do these kind of projects, and we try to tackle that to partner up with an art academy. We're asking master students from animation and gaming to make AR, like augmented reality animations of these memorial stones, so telling the stories and symbolisms that are present on the stones to share these narratives. And by partnering up, we also, we tackle the problem of money because we have shared budgets in that way, and involving youth because these master students are very interested in doing that. And I also have one question, and I think it kind of connects to the question that you just got, but could you elaborate on the learning objective of democracy connected to a cemetery? That's something I'm quite interested in.
Well, we think that if you if you learn something about this place, because we find that many of the children and youth in Sweden, they don't know anything about the cemeteries. And we find that there are a lot of adults that they don't know either. So, and I didn't know either 1 year ago. It's Helene who is the really... really
cemetery.
Yes, she is. I don't know what I am, but and I learned a lot. And I realized that, oh, nobody knows anything about this. And so that's not democracy, because if you don't know anything about it, how can you say anything about it? So we try to make the kids curious about this place, and then we learn them about this place. And eventually we hope that when they know something about this place, they can say something about it. And so we think that that is democracy, because, and then we have our Child and Youth Council, and they're like a bridge, these young representatives, they're like a bridge between the kids that we meet on the cemeteries and the different, well, what can you say, where the power is, where everybody has something to say about the cemeteries and how they are going to be or look like in the future. Our young representatives, they have a place at their table. We try to make sure that they have a place at their table. So that's how the democracy, we hope, we're not finished yet, but we hope that's how we can gain some kind of influence for the kids. Was that a good question? Yes, a good answer for your question?
Does this answer your question?
Yeah, one side question then.
Yeah.
Because it's actually for the representative. Are you from a program of a university or other form of education? Are you doing this as a volunteer?
No, so I'm a student at Lund University here, and I'm doing this as a part-time work. So
Do you pay for this?
Yeah, so I'm a student at Lund University, but I also do this as a part-time work. So we're employed by the project.
So that's really good, because I think it's also problematic to involve youth and not paying them, but kind of like using them to, I don't know. I think it's very good to hear that. At least that, because a place at the table also means that you're treated the same way. So really good, very glad to hear.
Okay.
Touch upon that, last year was European Year of Skills, all about democracy. Of course, we brought in many youngsters and also on the same level as we are, right? Because that's the thing, you are the future, so you need to be on the same level and in the same way appreciated and paid.
Thank you very much for all projects, but I have a question to the Alarm project too, because it's quite inspiring, because they are working clearly with very, very young students, children, I can say, it's not students anymore. And but I'm thinking a little bit, because I want to understand something, what you are doing. I feel that in our democracies, knowledge is disappearing or is not existing. Knowledge about each other, that means religions, that means also non-believers. A lot of non-believers do not know what religious people are doing during funerals and during the whole life. And as I come from a region that is comparable with your region in Sweden, I come from Saxony-Anhalt in Germany, we have around 11 to 12% members of the church, and the rest is non-believers. So that's why I'm very curious about your project, because it's a way to bring together young people to learn from each other and to have no fear of each other. So I have two questions. That's an interesting project for young people, but in the background, are there stakeholders of the religions, of organizations, of non-believers? We have the Humanistic Society in Germany to help you to come get knowledge, that knowledge that can you use in your work? First question. Are there stakeholders in your background? And the second is, you talked about the green, the trees on the cemetery. And you can do a lot of biological things, but is there a difference in your work looking at a tree in a park, in a wood, and in the cemetery? And what is the difference when it is there in your job, or is it not? So that I'm interested in, because my background is the same. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So the first question about involving... Oh, sorry. Sorry. The first question about involving different organizations. Is that correct? Yeah. And we do involve different, both religious and non-religious organizations in this project. Of course we do. Is that enough answer? Yeah.
And it's very important for us that it's both, because I mean we are a very secular country too. Yes. Yep.
The second question.
The specific
place
of the cemetery.
Is there a difference between a tree on a cemetery and in a park?
There's a huge difference between trees in parks and cemeteries.
Tell us.
Yeah, how do we deal with that?
How do we deal with that?
With the difference.
If you educate the children, do you
the difference between the trees, because of the planted for certain reason in the cemeteries, it could be mourning trees, for instance, and the ones that's framing the cemetery. They also have a tradition of protecting the surrounding from bacteria and viruses and such. And then there's also this alleys that's guiding the visitors, so you can find your way. And these are things that we are telling the children with the different trees and different things.
Thank you, very interesting.
Yes, it is.
I think for all of us there's still a lot to learn about cemeteries, because now you already feel new things about trees and why these trees are planted there. So very interesting. Next question.
I continue with a question to the cemetery. Being a representative of the Church of Sweden, I'm curious about your background. Are you educated teachers from the beginning? And then I'm interested in the Church of Sweden is the one who takes care of all the cemeteries, almost in Sweden except for Stockholm and Alvesta. So in Tranås, tack. How are you maintaining this as a non-religious thing to do? Because even we do children's work towards schools, and it works not being religious in a way with them. And then I also wonder that's 3 questions. The one, your background. 2, are you continuing to be non-religious or non-political or whatever? And then the third question is, as a thinking entrepreneurship, are you going to, is it always that there has to be a teacher on site, or are you thinking phone applications for families to go on Saturdays or Sundays and doing a bingo in the phone or whatever to maintain this without you being at the spot?
So it's the first question. You can start. My background is a researcher within pedagogue education, and I'm also got a landscape planning bachelor degree. And Kristina?
I'm from a different area. I'm from the arts. I'm working with theater and film, but I'm also a teacher. I teach acting, but I teach for children too. And so for me, this was like a whole new area and a very, very exciting one. And I'm used to leading projects because that's what you do in theater.
Yeah, good. Second question.
Second question. So it's non-political, non-religious, and it means that we know that we have to embrace all the religions because it's a religious heritage too. But the project is non-political and non-religious, and we have to be because we're funded by Allmänna arvsfonden. Yes.
And the third one?
Was applications and...
Yes, we're going to do an application, and we're going to do like a manual for schools and for teachers and for people who staff in the kyrkogårdsförvaltningen. I don't know what that word is in English.
Administration.
Administration. Yes.
Okay. Last question.
Well, it's not a question, it's an announcement, and we promise that Jonas could do it here.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Just a brief announcement. Some of you know the organization Open Churches, who's active in Belgium, the Netherlands, France. Has more than 500 members of churches who open up their church for people. And the organization is thinking a little bit about its future, and we would invite you to briefly reflect about that future at 5, as we have here a lot of organizations who can be involved. So our meeting point would be at the entrance of the museum, so when you get out this building to the left, and then we look a place where we can have a drink.
You mean outside the museum?
Outside.
Because they are closing the museum at 5 o'clock.
Yes, outside.
Yeah, good.
If you want to follow this lead, then look for Jonas after all our conferences and meetings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody. As a little present from the Diocese of Lund, we do have the wonderful cathedral chocolate to each of you. So let's have a look. Who do we have? Bogdan-Ilie. Here you go. Thank you. Thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Jennie. Shaul. Here you go.
Thank you.
You have to be democratic.
We are.
Thank you. Now it's